"You'll never be like my mother." The words hung in the air like shattered glass. Everyone at the Sunday dinner table froze. My son Robert stared at his plate. My husband gripped his fork tighter. And Jessica, my daughter-in-law of 3 years, just smiled that smile, the one that never reaches her eyes. I felt something inside me crack. 3 years of trying. 3 years of second-guessing. 3 years of never being enough. I pushed my chair back. The scrape against the hardwood floor sounded like a scream in the silence. That's when everyone looked up. They thought I would run. They expected tears. Jessica expected victory. What they got instead was something none of us saw coming. It's good to have you here with me. If you're already hooked, drop a like and comment your city and state so I can find you in the comments. I want to see how far our stories reach. The thing about family wounds? They're universal. They cross state lines, borders, oceans. I remember thinking, as I stood there with my chair pushed back, that this wasn't how a family dinner was supposed to end. The roast I'd spent hours preparing was still warm. The table I'd decorated with Jessica's favorite flowers, lilies, still looked perfect. The apple pie, her favorite, not mine, was waiting in the kitchen. 3 years of trying to be the mother-in-law I never had. 3 years of walking on eggshells. "Mom?" Robert's voice was barely a whisper. My son, caught between wife and mother, always trying to keep peace. I saw his eyes pleading, "Don't make this worse. Don't escalate. Not again." But this wasn't like the other times. This wasn't about the Christmas gifts she'd returned without opening. This wasn't about the baby advice she'd dismissed with an eye roll. This wasn't even about the photos of Robert's childhood she'd removed from their living room because they didn't match the aesthetic. This was a public execution. This was her letting me know, in front of everyone, exactly where I stood. I looked at her face. Perfectly made up. Perfectly controlled. I knew that look. I'd spent 3 years studying it. The slight upturn at the corner of her mouth. The cold calculation in her eyes. The satisfaction of having delivered the perfect blow in the perfect moment with the perfect audience. My hands were steady as I pushed the chair back further. In that moment, something shifted. Not just the heavy oak chair against the floor, but something deeper, something fundamental. Family dinners had always been sacred to me. Growing up with a single mother who worked 3 jobs, our Sunday dinners were the one time we connected. When Robert married Jessica, I promised myself I'd create that same safe space for them, a place where love was served alongside the food, where memories were made between bites, where the table was a bridge, not a battlefield. But for 3 years, that table had become a stage for Jessica's subtle cruelty. The backhanded compliments, the dismissive glances, the way she'd talk about her own mother, the saint, the perfect nurturer, the woman I could never measure up to. I never met her mother. Cancer took her 2 years before Jessica met Robert. Perhaps that's why I tried so hard. I knew that hole in her heart. I thought foolishly that I could help fill it. Not replace, never replace, but perhaps complement. Be the mother-in-law she needed now. How wrong I was. "You'll never be like my mother." 6 words, 6 daggers. The silence stretched as I stood there. Jessica's smirk began to falter. This wasn't the reaction she expected. Where were my tears? Where was my retreat? Where was the predictable pattern we'd established over 3 painful years? My son's eyes widened. My husband set down his fork. Jessica's smile disappeared completely. I had pushed my chair back not to leave, but to rise. What happened next would change everything. It would redefine boundaries, expose secrets, and teach me the difference between being kind and being a doormat. It would show me that sometimes love means standing your ground. That dignity isn't negotiable. That family, true family, doesn't demand your destruction as proof of your devotion. Before Jessica's cruel words, Before the chair scraped back against the floor, before everything changed, there was a different story. A story of hopeful beginnings, of genuine attempts, of a mother-in-law determined not to be the villain in her son's marriage. I remember the day Robert introduced her. Spring, 3 years ago. Cherry blossoms outside our home like pink snow. Her smile seemed genuine then. "I've heard so much about you," she'd said, accepting my hug with what felt like real warmth. "Robert says you make the best apple pie in Virginia." I'd baked one that very morning, cut a slice for her, watched her take a bite and close her eyes in what seemed like genuine pleasure. "Almost as good as my mom's," she'd said. I didn't catch it then. That first comparison, that first measurement against an impossible standard. I was too busy being grateful for her approval, too hopeful about our future relationship. My own mother-in-law had been a cold, critical woman who viewed me as the thief who stole her son. I'd promised myself I'd never be that woman. I'd be supportive, loving, present, but not intrusive. The kind of mother-in-law I wished I'd had. Those early days with Jessica were filled with coffees where I listened more than I spoke, shopping trips where I admired her taste, baby conversations where I offered advice only when asked. I kept photo albums of Robert's childhood ready for when she showed interest. I learned her favorite foods, remembered her allergies, noted the wines she preferred. I thought we were building something. I thought the effort was mutual. The first hairline fractures appeared subtly. A canceled lunch here. I ignored texts there. The way she'd interrupt when I spoke to my son. The way she'd rearrange things in my kitchen when she visited, as though teaching me a better system. "My mother always said a kitchen reflects a woman's mind," she'd comment, reorganizing my spice rack without asking. Little jabs, delivered with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. But I persisted, remembered my promise to myself, kept trying. My husband noticed first. "She's not being fair to you," he'd say after they'd leave. I'd wave him off. "She lost her mother. She's still grieving. It's not personal." But it was personal. Every comparison, every dismissal, every time she'd say, "Well, my mother always," followed by some implied criticism of my methods, my home, my relationship with my son. The most painful moments were watching Robert caught in the middle, the way his eyes would dart between us during tense exchanges, the careful way he'd try to mediate without taking sides. I never wanted to be the reason for conflict in his marriage. So I kept stepping back, giving more ground, trying harder. "You don't have to let her talk to you that way," my sister told me after witnessing a particularly cutting remark at last Thanksgiving. But I just smiled and changed the subject. Peacekeeping was what I did. It was how I'd held our family together through hard times. It was how I showed love. In your place, would you have spoken up right away, or waited for more proof? Comment, speak up, or wait, because I wonder sometimes if I waited too long. If all that silence just taught her I was safe to target. The Sunday dinners became our tradition after Robert and Jessica married, a weekly anchor I thought we all valued. I'd spend days planning the menu, making sure to include Jessica's preferences. I'd set the table with care, light candles, create the warm family atmosphere I'd always dreamed of. For a while, it seemed to work. There were good days, laughs, moments when Jessica would let her guard down, and I'd glimpse the daughter-in-law I hoped for. When she announced her pregnancy 6 months ago, I cried with joy, held her hands, promised to be there however she needed me. "My mother would have been the perfect grandmother," she'd said, her eyes distant. She knew exactly how to care for babies. Another comparison, another reminder of my inadequacy in her eyes. But I'd squeezed her hand anyway. I know she would have been wonderful. "I hope I can be a good grandmother too, in my own way." She'd looked at me then, something unreadable in her expression. "We'll see." The stage was set. The pattern established, the tension building, invisible to most but increasingly obvious to me, all leading to that fatal Sunday dinner, that cruel comment, that pushed-back chair. The first real warning came during Jessica's baby shower. I'd spent weeks planning it, coordinating with her friends, making sure everything reflected her taste, not mine. Soft yellows and greens, gender-neutral as they'd requested, games that weren't too cheesy, food that accommodated everyone's dietary needs. "You've done a nice job," Jessica said when she arrived, her eyes scanning the decorations, her tone suggesting surprise rather than gratitude. Then, lower, when others weren't listening, "My mother threw legendary parties. People still talk about her baby shower for me." A small cut, but it drew blood. Later, as she opened gifts, she held up the hand-knitted blanket I'd spent months making. Tiny stitches in the softest yarn I could find. Hours of love worked into every row. "Oh," she said, and the pause that followed was deafening. "It's homemade. How quaint." She set it aside quickly, reaching for the next gift. I saw Robert wince, saw his friend's wife, 8 months pregnant herself, catch my eye with sympathy. "My mother was an incredible seamstress," Jessica continued, unprompted. "She made all my baby clothes by hand. They looked store-bought. They were so perfect." The message was clear. My effort was inadequate. My love, insufficient. My gift, lacking. I smiled anyway. Kept the tears at bay until I was alone in the bathroom, where I pressed cold water to my eyes and whispered to myself, "It's not about you. It's about her loss. Be kind. Keep trying." The mantra I'd repeated for years. When they announced the baby's name a month later, Elaine, after Jessica's mother, I was genuinely happy for them. It was a beautiful way to honor her memory. But then Jessica added, looking directly at me, "We want her to grow up knowing who she was named for, the kind of woman she should aspire to be, not cruel enough to object to, not kind enough to feel anything but diminished." In your place, would you have said something then? Would you have drawn a line? Comment, "Speak up," or wait? Sometimes I wonder if silence in the face of subtle cruelty is really kindness or just slow surrender. The baby's nursery became another battlefield. Jessica had asked for my help, and I'd been so touched by the inclusion that I'd rearranged my schedule entirely, driven to their home with paint samples, crib catalogs, and a heart full of hope that this shared project might bridge the growing distance between us. 3 hours in, after every suggestion I'd made had been met with the same response, "My mother would have..." I finally asked the question that had been burning inside me. "Jessica," I said gently, sorting through fabric samples, "I know your mother was wonderful. I wish I could have known her. But I'm here now, trying to help. Could we maybe focus on what you want, not what your mother might have done?" The silence that followed was arctic. Jessica's face hardened into a mask I was becoming too familiar with. "You couldn't possibly understand," she said finally. "You're not her. You'll never be her. I don't know why I thought this was a good idea." She'd left me sitting alone in the half-painted nursery, surrounded by discarded ideas and the growing certainty that nothing I did would ever be enough. That night, Robert called, his voice tight with tension. "Mom, Jessica's really upset. She says you criticized her mother." "That's not what happened," I started to explain, but he cut me off. "Can you just try harder with her? She's pregnant. She's emotional. She misses her mom. Please?" For his sake, I apologized. For his sake, I kept trying. For his sake, I swallowed the hurt and showed up the next weekend with fresh paint and no memory of the incident. But something had shifted. The pretense of civility was wearing thinner. The comparisons became more frequent, more pointed. The message clearer. I was competing with a ghost, and the ghost would always win. When Elaine was born, beautiful and perfect with Robert's eyes and Jessica's chin, I thought perhaps things would change, that the reality of a new life might eclipse old grievances, that grandmotherhood might offer a fresh start. I was wrong. My mother would have known how to hold her properly, Jessica said the first time I cradled my granddaughter. She had a way with babies. They never cried with her. As if on cue, Elaine began to fuss in my arms. Jessica's smile was all triumph as she took her back, soothing her instantly. Another battle lost in a war I never agreed to fight. The tension built with each passing week. Small incidents accumulated like storm clouds. The text messages when I'd ask to see the baby. "We're really busy right now. Maybe next week." The way Jessica would correct my holding technique, my feeding advice, my lullabies, always with the same refrain. My mother did it differently. I started noticing Robert's calls becoming shorter, his visits less frequent, the invisible wall growing between us, a wall with Jessica as its architect and my son as its reluctant builder. 6 weeks after Elaine's birth, I brought over a homemade meal. Nothing fancy, just a lasagna they could heat up, a salad ready to serve, fresh bread, and a pie. New parents need fuel, and cooking was my love language. Jessica opened the door, Elaine in her arms. Her expression when she saw the food containers was a complex mix of annoyance and something else. Something darker. "Oh," she said flatly. "More food." I followed her to the kitchen, where I saw the counters lined with similar containers. Other well-wishers, other helpers. "We can't possibly eat all this," she sighed, shifting Elaine to her other arm. "Robert's mother from his office already brought 2 casseroles yesterday." Robert's mother from his office. Not your lasagna. Not your help. The erasure was deliberate. I was being removed from the narrative, one small linguistic choice at a time. If that chill went down your spine too, comment erasure so I know you felt it. It's when they start removing your name, your connection, that you know something deeper is happening. I put the food in their refrigerator, rearranging items to make space. Found the back row filled with containers I'd brought over previous weeks, untouched. Perfectly preserved evidence that my efforts were unwanted. I said nothing, just closed the refrigerator door and asked if I could hold my granddaughter. "She's about to go down for a nap," Jessica replied, though Elaine's eyes were wide open, curious, focused on my face. Maybe next time. There was always a reason, always a barrier, always a way to ensure my time with Elaine was supervised, limited, controlled. On the rare occasions when I was permitted to babysit, I'd return to find Jessica inspecting everything. The bottle position, the diaper alignment, the temperature of the nursery. Checking for failures she seemed almost disappointed not to find. "My mother could always tell when a baby was about to get sick," she remarked once, touching Elaine's forehead. She had this sixth sense. Probably saved my life more than once. The implication clear. I lacked this essential grandmother gene. I was deficient in some fundamental way that Jessica's mother had mastered. I remember standing in their living room, watching Jessica hold Elaine, thinking about the photographs I'd never seen. "Do you have pictures of your mother holding you as a baby?" I asked. An innocent question. A genuine attempt to connect. Jessica stiffened. "Why?" "I'd just love to see them. To see Elaine's grandmother. To understand the woman who raised such a strong daughter." For a moment, something flickered in Jessica's eyes. Panic? Anger? Something I couldn't identify. Then it was gone, replaced by the familiar cold dismissal. "Those photos are private, special, not for just anyone to look at." Not just anyone. After 3 years of trying, after giving her my son, after opening my home and heart, I was still not just anyone. Later that evening, while Jessica was putting Elaine down, I noticed a photo album on their bookshelf I hadn't seen before. Without thinking, I pulled it down, opened it, found it filled with wedding photos and family portraits, with my image carefully removed from each one. Precise cuts where I had stood, my face excised, my presence erased. I was still holding the album when Jessica returned. "What are you doing?" Her voice was ice. I closed the album, my hands shaking. "These photos are none of your business." She took the album, replaced it on the shelf. "You should go now. Robert will be home late. Elaine needs quiet." I left with the weight of those missing photographs pressing on my chest. The deliberate removal of me from family history. The methodical erasure of my existence. That night, I called my son. He didn't pick up. I texted. No response. When he finally called back the next day, his voice was distant, defensive before I'd even spoken. "Jessica said you were snooping through our things." No hello, no warmth, just accusation. "Robert, there are photos where I've been cut out." "Mom, stop. Just stop making everything about you. Jessica has been through so much. She lost her mother. Can't you just let her have some control over her own home, her own memories?" The loyalty was shifting. The ground beneath our relationship, crumbling. Another piece of evidence that something was very wrong. Another warning sign I chose to rationalize away. The invitation to Sunday dinner came from Robert, not Jessica. His voice on the phone carried a strange mixture of hope and anxiety. "Mom, we'd like to come over this Sunday. The three of us. It's been a while since we've done a family dinner. 6 weeks, to be precise. 6 weeks since the photo album incident. 6 weeks of minimal contact, of texted updates about Elaine instead of visits, of a growing distance I could feel but couldn't bridge." "Of course," I said, heart lifting. "I'd love that. What would Elaine like me to cook?" A pause. "Actually, Jessica suggested you make your pot roast. She said it's almost as good as her mother's was." The backhanded compliment stung, but I focused on the positive. They were coming. They were bringing Elaine. There was an opportunity to heal whatever was broken. I spent the next 4 days preparing. Cleaned the house top to bottom. Bought flowers. Lilies, Jessica's favorite. Polished the silver we rarely used. Set the table with my best dishes. Prepared the pot roast with extra care, following the recipe exactly. Made Jessica's favorite sides. Baked an apple pie that took 3 attempts to get perfect. Everything had to be perfect. This dinner felt like a final exam I couldn't afford to fail. The morning of, I found myself staring at old photographs. Robert as a baby. Robert on his first bike. Robert at graduation. The milestones of motherhood that had brought me such joy. Would Elaine's milestones be shared with me? Or would I be kept at the periphery, allowed only glimpses through the fence Jessica was building? Who do you think was really behind this dinner invitation? A, Robert trying to fix things, or B, Jessica with her own agenda? Comment A or B and tell me why. I still wonder about this myself. They arrived precisely on time. Robert carrying Elaine in her car seat. Jessica empty-handed, surveying my home as though cataloging changes since her last visit. "You rearranged the living room," she noted immediately. "Just trying something new," I replied, reaching for Elaine. "May I?" A flicker of reluctance crossed Jessica's face before she nodded. I lifted my granddaughter from her car seat, breathed in her perfect baby smell, felt the solid, warm weight of her in my arms. 3 months old now and already so alert, so present. Her eyes, so like Robert's, focused on my face with what seemed like recognition. "She knows you," Robert said, watching us with a soft smile. The first genuine smile I'd seen from him in weeks. "Babies that age don't recognize faces yet," Jessica countered quickly. "My mother always said people project emotions onto babies that they're not capable of feeling." The first comparison, delivered within minutes of arrival, I felt my jaw tighten but kept my smile in place as I cooed to Elaine. Dinner started pleasantly enough. Robert praised the pot roast. Jessica acknowledged the lilies. I kept the conversation light, asking about Elaine's sleep schedule, about Robert's work, about anything that felt safe. It was Jessica who shifted the terrain. "We've been talking about having my mother's jewelry reset," she said, cutting her meat with precise movements. "For Elaine, when she's older. Family heirlooms are so important, don't you think?" "Of course," I agreed. "I've put aside some pieces for her too, including my grandmother's pearl necklace." Jessica's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "Oh? I didn't realize you had any significant pieces." The dismissal was so casual, so complete. My family history, my legacy, deemed insignificant with 7 words. Robert cleared his throat. "Mom's grandmother came over from Ireland with those pearls sewn into her hem," he said, a rare defense. "They're actually quite valuable historically and monetarily." Jessica's smile tightened. "How interesting. My mother's jewelry came from Paris. Her father was a diplomat, you know." Another comparison. Another elevation of her lineage above mine. Another subtle push to establish hierarchy. I noticed Robert's hand on the table, fingers tapping in anxious rhythm. He'd always done that as a child when stress was building. A warning sign I'd learned to read decades ago. "More potatoes?" I offered, trying to shift the conversation to safer ground. "I'm watching my figure," Jessica replied. "The baby weight is so stubborn." A pointed look at my middle-aged spread. Another small arrow finding its mark. The meal continued this way. Pleasant on the surface, treacherous underneath. Every topic Jessica introduced seemed designed to establish her superiority, her mother's perfection, my inadequacy. By dessert, the atmosphere was charged with unspoken tension. Robert's fingers hadn't stopped their anxious tapping. Jessica's smiles had grown sharper. Even Elaine, sensitive to the emotional undercurrents, had begun to fuss in her portable crib beside the table. I served the apple pie I'd labored over, watched as Jessica took a small, bird-like bite. "It's sweet," she said, setting down her fork. "My mother believed desserts shouldn't overwhelm with sugar. Sophistication comes from restraint." I felt something inside me, some last reserve of patience, some final thread of hope, begin to unravel. And then she delivered the blow that would change everything. I should have seen it coming. The entire dinner had been building to this moment, each comparison a step toward the cliff edge, each dismissal bringing us closer to the point of no return. The apple pie sat on the table between us, barely touched. Elaine had settled back to sleep after Robert gently rocked her. The conversation had lulled into an uncomfortable silence broken only by the sound of forks against plates. "You know," Jessica said suddenly, setting down her water glass with deliberate precision, "I've been thinking about my mother a lot lately, about what kind of grandmother she would have been to Elaine." Robert's tapping fingers stilled. His eyes darted to me in warning, then back to his wife. "Jess, maybe this isn't—" "No, it's important," she continued, cutting him off. "Family legacy matters. What we pass down matters." Her gaze fixed on me, calculating and cold. My mother had this way about her, this natural grace with children. They gravitated to her, trusted her instinctively. I nodded, trying to be encouraging, trying to show I understood the loss she still felt. "She sounds wonderful. I wish I could have known her." Jessica's smile didn't reach her eyes. "No, you don't. Because then you'd have to face how different you are from her. How much less." The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Robert's face flushed. "Jessica, that's enough." But it wasn't enough for her. I could see it in the set of her jaw, the glint in her eyes. She'd been building to this moment, planning it perhaps. The public execution of whatever hope I still held for our relationship. "It's fine, Robert," I said quietly. Jessica has every right to miss her mother. It's not about missing her, Jessica replied, voice hard as flint. It's about standards, about what Elaine deserves in a grandmother. And there it was, the real issue laid bare. Not that I wasn't her mother, but that I wasn't good enough for her daughter, not worthy of the title grandmother in her eyes. Take a breath with me. Would you stay at the table at this point, or would you walk away? Comment stay or leave, because what was coming next would change everything. I looked at my son, my beautiful boy who now sat torn between wife and mother, loyalty splitting him down the middle. I saw the tension in his shoulders, the pleading in his eyes. Stay calm, those eyes begged. Don't make this worse. But something was shifting inside me, some dam beginning to crack. 3 years of trying, 3 years of comparison, 3 years of being measured against a ghost and found wanting. 3 years of watching my relationship with my son erode under the constant pressure of Jessica's resentment. What exactly are your standards for a grandmother, Jessica? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Her eyebrows rose, surprised by the direct question. Someone who understands boundaries. Who respects parenting decisions without question? Who knows her place? Her place, I repeated slowly. And where exactly is my place in your view? Robert shifted uncomfortably. Mom, she didn't mean... I can answer for myself, Jessica interrupted. She leaned forward slightly. Your place is wherever we decide it is. That's how it works when you're not the primary parent. You get the privilege of being involved with Elaine on our terms. On your terms, I corrected. Not Robert's and yours. Yours. A flush crept up Jessica's neck. Robert and I are united on this. I looked at my son. Are you, Robert? Are you united in keeping me at arm's length from my granddaughter? In dictating when and how I can see her? In measuring me against an impossible standard? His eyes dropped to the tablecloth, the answer clear in his silence. Jessica's lips curved in triumph. She reached for her water glass, hand perfectly steady. This is exactly what I mean. You make everything about you, your feelings, your desires. My mother understood that grandparenting is a privilege, not a right. The mention of her mother again. The perfect yardstick against which I would always fall short. The ghost I could never exorcise. I felt a strange calm settling over me. The kind of clarity that comes after years of fog. This wasn't about grief anymore. This wasn't about Jessica missing her mother or needing time to adjust to her new role. This was about power, about control, about systematically severing the bond between me and my son, me and my granddaughter. Jessica set down her glass and delivered the final blow, her voice soft but carrying in the silence of the dining room. You'll never be like my mother. 6 words that crystallized 3 years of subtle cruelty. 6 words that confirmed what I'd suspected but tried to deny. 6 words that made clear there was no future where I would be good enough, try hard enough, submit enough. 6 words that finally pushed me past the point of endless accommodation. I looked at the beautiful table I'd set, the flowers I'd chosen for her, the meal I'd prepared with such care, the pie cooling, uneaten. The evidence of 3 years of trying to bridge a gap that Jessica had been deliberately widening. And I made a decision that would change everything. I pushed my chair back. The scrape of chair legs against hardwood echoed in the silent dining room. Everyone froze. Robert half rising as if to stop me. Jessica watching with that cold, calculating stare. Waiting for the tears. Waiting for the retreat she'd come to expect. But I didn't move toward the door. Instead, I stood taller, straightened my shoulders, felt something shift inside me, not breaking but reforming, like bones setting after a fracture, stronger at the healed places. You're right, Jessica, I said, my voice calm and clear. I will never be like your mother. Her smirk started to form, that familiar expression of victory. "I will never be like your mother," I continued, "because I'm not her. I'm me. I've spent 3 years trying to compete with a ghost, trying to measure up to an impossible standard, trying to be someone I'm not." Robert's eyes widened. Jessica's smirk faltered. "I've watched you compare everything I do to some idealized memory of your mother. I've let you diminish me at every turn. I've stood by while you've systematically tried to erase me from my son's life, from my granddaughter's future." Jessica's face flushed. "That's not—" "It is," I cut her off. 3 years of silence finally breaking. The cut-out photos, the constant comparisons, the canceled visits, the supervised time with Elaine, the way you correct everything I say or do with, "My mother would have." You've been trying to replace me with her memory since the day we met. The truth hung in the air between us. Robert looked stricken, glancing between his wife and me as though seeing something for the first time. "Mom," he began, but I held up my hand. "No, Robert, I need to say this. I've earned the right to say this." I turned back to Jessica, who sat rigid in her chair. "I understand grief, Jessica. I understand missing your mother. What I don't understand is cruelty disguised as comparison. I don't understand systematic emotional abuse masked as high standards." "Abuse?" she repeated, her voice rising. "How dare you? I've done nothing but try to ensure Elaine has the best possible care. By eliminating me from her life? By cutting me out of photos? By making sure every interaction is controlled, limited, supervised? That's not about Elaine's care. That's about your need for control." Jessica pushed back her own chair, standing to face me. "You have no idea what you're talking about. My mother was twice the woman you are. She would never have allowed this kind of disrespect. Your mother isn't here," I said quietly. "I am. I'm the grandmother Elaine has. I'm the mother Robert has. And I deserve basic respect, not constant comparison to someone I can never be, never replace, and frankly, given what I've seen of your behavior, someone I'm not sure I want to emulate." The room went deadly silent. Jessica's face drained of color. Robert made a strangled sound. "You don't know anything about my mother," Jessica whispered, voice shaking with rage. "I know what you've told me. I know she raised a daughter who believes cruelty is justified if it's delivered with a smile, who believes family relationships are about power, not love, who uses grief as a weapon to wound others." I turned to my son, whose face reflected shock, confusion, and something else, a dawning recognition. "Robert, I've tried for 3 years to be the perfect mother-in-law, to never complain, to accept every slight, every dismissal, every comparison. I did it for you, because I love you. But I cannot, will not, be erased from your life or Elaine's because I don't match some impossible standard Jessica has created." Jessica's hands gripped the edge of the table. "This is exactly why we've limited your time with Elaine. This emotional manipulation, this drama." "No drama," I replied calmly. "Just truth, finally spoken after too long silent." I reached down to the table, picked up my water glass, took a deliberate sip. The simple act seemed to confuse Jessica, who had clearly expected me to storm out, to cry, to beg. Anything but this calm assertion. "Here's what's going to happen now," I said, setting the glass down carefully. "I'm Robert's mother. I'm Elaine's grandmother. That doesn't change because you wish it would. It doesn't change because you prefer the memory of your own mother. It simply is." Jessica's laugh was brittle. "You think this little speech changes anything? You think—" I interrupted, "that it's time to see the photographs of your mother." The request hung in the air like a thunderclap. Jessica went completely still. "What?" Her voice was barely audible. "The photographs you've never shown us. The ones you keep private, special, not for just anyone." I think it's time we saw exactly who I'm being compared to, don't you? Jessica's face underwent a remarkable transformation. Shock, fear, calculation, anger, all flashing across her features in rapid succession. There's no need for that, she said finally, her voice strained. This conversation is over. But it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Because my simple request had revealed something neither Robert nor I had seen before. Something hidden behind 3 years of comparison and criticism. Something that would change everything. Why can't we see the photos, Jessica? I asked, my voice gentle now, curious rather than accusatory. She crossed her arms, defensive. They're private. Special. I don't have to share them with you. Robert was watching his wife carefully, something new in his expression. Jess, what's going on? You've talked about your mom constantly for years, but I've never seen a single photograph of her. Not one. Jessica's eyes darted between us. They're at my father's house, in storage. But you said you had albums, I pressed. Albums that were too special to share. I did. I do. Just not here. The hesitation was telling. The careful construction beginning to crack. Robert leaned forward. Jessica, we've been married for 3 years. We have a child together. How have I never seen a picture of your mother? Jessica stood abruptly, moving to the portable crib where Elaine slept peacefully, unaware of the earthquake happening around her. This is ridiculous. I don't have to prove anything to either of you. We're leaving. As she bent to pick up Elaine, Robert's voice stopped her. Your father's number. Give it to me. Jessica froze. What? Your father's number. You said the photos are at his house. Let's call him, now. The blood drained from Jessica's face. He's traveling. In Europe. Hard to reach. Then his address. Robert pressed. We'll drive over tomorrow. I'd like to see these photos of your mother. The woman you've compared my mom to for 3 years. The standard you've held over all of us. Jessica straightened, leaving Elaine sleeping. You don't trust me, she whispered, eyes filling with tears. My own husband doesn't believe me. The tears, a familiar tactic I'd seen her deploy whenever confronted. The victim role slipped on like a well-worn coat. But Robert wasn't backing down. It's not about trust, Jess. It's about transparency, about honesty. Why is seeing a photo of your mother such a big deal? Jessica's tears dried instantly, replaced by cold fury. Fine. You want the truth? My mother was nothing like I described. She was a drunk who could barely remember my name half the time, who brought home men who looked at me in ways no child should be looked at, who threw bottles when she was angry and disappeared for days when she was on a bender. The confession hung in the air, shocking in its sudden rawness. My father wasn't a diplomat, she continued, voice hard. He was a truck driver who left when I was 4 and never looked back. I grew up in a series of apartments, each one worse than the last, with a mother who resented my existence. I swore if I ever had a child, they would have the family story I never did, the legacy I deserved. Have you ever trusted someone and had them betray that trust completely? What did you learn from that experience? Your comment might help another family going through this. Robert looked stricken. Jessica, why didn't you just tell me the truth and admit I came from nothing? That my mother was a cautionary tale, not a role model? That I have no idea how to be a mother because I never really had one? She laughed bitterly. Would you have married me then, Robert? Brought me home to your perfect family? Your perfect mother? I stepped forward, heart aching at the pain beneath Jessica's carefully constructed facade. Jessica, there's no shame in surviving a difficult childhood. There's only strength. She turned on me, eyes flashing. Don't try to comfort me now. Don't pretend you understand. I don't pretend to understand your specific pain, I said carefully, but I understand wanting more for your child than you had. I understand the fear of repeating patterns. What I don't understand is why that meant pushing me away, cutting me out, comparing me to a fictional standard. Jessica's shoulders sagged slightly. Because you're real, she whispered. You're here, loving Robert, loving Elaine, being everything my mother wasn't. And every time I see that, every time I see what a real mother looks like, it reminds me of what I never had, what was stolen from me. The truth, finally. Not about competitions or standards or family legacies, about pain and absence and the ghost of what should have been. Robert moved to his wife, took her hands. Jess, why didn't you tell me? Because I was ashamed, she admitted, tears now falling freely. Because I thought if you knew where I really came from, who I really was, you might change your mind. About me. About us. Never, he said firmly. Never. I watched them. This moment of painful honesty between them, feeling both witness and intruder. The revelation explained so much. The constant comparisons. The idealized mother who never existed. The need to control the narrative. Jessica hadn't been competing with me. She'd been creating the mother she wished she'd had, and holding everyone to that impossible fiction. It didn't excuse the cruelty, the manipulation, the systematic attempt to separate me from my son and granddaughter. But it explained it. And explanation, while not absolution, was at least a place to start. Jessica looked up at me over Robert's shoulder, her face naked with vulnerability I'd never seen before. I don't know how to be a good mother, she confessed quietly. I don't know how to be a good daughter-in-law. I don't have any real examples to follow. And in that moment of raw honesty, a door opened that 3 years of trying had never managed to unlock. 3 months have passed since that Sunday dinner, since the chair pushed back, since the truth finally emerged from beneath layers of fiction and fear. 3 months of careful rebuilding, of tentative steps toward something new, something real. The night of the confrontation, after tears and truths had been exhausted, after Elaine had woken fussy and been soothed back to sleep, after we'd all sat shell-shocked by the revelations that had changed everything, I'd made a simple offer. Stay tonight, I'd said to Jessica and Robert. The guest room is made up. It's too late to drive home with the baby. Jessica had looked at me with suspicion, searching for the catch, the hidden agenda. Finding none, she'd nodded once, a wordless acceptance of the temporary truce. That night, as the house settled into silence, I'd heard crying from the guest room. Not Elaine's newborn wails, but the deep, soul-wrenching sobs of someone whose carefully constructed walls had finally crumbled. I'd stood outside the door, hand raised to knock, then lowered it again. Some healing needs privacy. Some pain needs to be fully felt before it can begin to release. The next morning, Jessica had appeared in my kitchen, eyes red-rimmed but clear. She'd watched silently as I prepared coffee, as I mixed pancake batter, as I hummed to Elaine who lay contented in her portable swing. I don't know how to fix this, she'd said finally, voice raspy from crying. I don't know if it can be fixed. I'd poured her coffee, slid it across the counter. We don't have to fix everything at once. We can just start by being honest, by being present. Why would you even want to try? After everything I've done, everything I've said? The answer had come easily, naturally. Because you're Robert's wife. Because you're Elaine's mother. Because family isn't about deserving or earning. It's about belonging. She'd cried again then. Quieter tears that seemed to wash away something dark and heavy within her. We didn't become best friends overnight. Real healing isn't like that. It's messy and non-linear, with progress and setbacks, moments of connection and flashes of old patterns trying to reassert themselves. But we began. A foundation built on truth instead of fiction, on acceptance instead of competition. For our Black community, protection is life itself. What advice would you leave for this family? Write with care. This is a space of welcome and healing. Jessica started therapy, began the hard work of grieving her real mother, not the idealized version she'd created, of understanding how that absence had shaped her, how the fear of inadequacy had driven her to push away anyone who might witness her struggle. She shared stories gradually, painful, real stories of her childhood, not to excuse her behavior, but to explain the wounded place it had come from. Robert heard these stories with compassion, with a deeper understanding of the woman he'd married. And I listened too, not as a competitor or critic, but as someone who cared, who wanted to understand, who recognized that Jessica's journey was both nothing like mine and fundamentally human in its complexity. The photo album with my cutout image was addressed one difficult afternoon. Jessica brought it out herself, showed me the careful excisions, admitted the fear and resentment that had driven her to literally remove me from the family narrative. I was afraid, she confessed. Afraid Robert would see us side by side and realize he'd married someone broken, someone who didn't know how to be part of a real family. Together, we found the original photos, replaced them carefully, restored the visual history that had been altered by fear. Elaine became our common ground, our shared joy. I no longer had to ask permission to hold her, to feed her, to sing to her. Jessica no longer watched my every move with critical eyes, waiting for failures to catalog. Instead, we began to learn from each other. I shared the wisdom of having raised a child, the perspective that comes with time. She shared the latest research, the new approaches to parenting that hadn't existed in my day. We didn't always agree. There were still tense moments, still times when old patterns threatened to re-emerge. But beneath it all was a new foundation, the understanding that we weren't enemies or competitors. We were two women who loved the same people, who wanted the best for them, who could choose cooperation over conflict. Last week, Jessica invited me to their home for dinner. Not Robert extending the invitation while she stood silent beside him, but Jessica herself, calling me directly, planning the meal with me, asking for my apple pie recipe because Elaine should grow up with her grandmother's apple pie. As I watched her move around her kitchen, confident and centered in a way I'd never seen before, she paused suddenly, turned to me with uncharacteristic vulnerability. "Thank you," she said simply, "for not giving up, for pushing your chair back instead of walking away." I smiled, bouncing Elaine on my hip. "Some battles are worth fighting. Family always is." She nodded, understanding the deeper truth beneath the simple words. Sometimes pushing back isn't about rejection or anger. Sometimes it's the bravest form of love, the refusal to accept less than the dignity and respect every person deserves. The chair I pushed back that Sunday evening became more than furniture. It became a boundary line, a declaration, a moment when accommodation transformed into self-respect. "You'll never be like my mother," Jessica had said, intending wound, delivering liberation instead. She was right. I would never be the fantasy mother she'd created from absence and longing. I would never match an impossible standard designed specifically to be unreachable. I would never be anything but myself, imperfect, real, present. And that finally was enough. The journey since that night hasn't been easy. Truth rarely creates instant harmony. Jessica still struggles with the habits of a lifetime, the defense mechanisms built in childhood. Sometimes, in moments of stress or insecurity, the old comparisons slip out, the old barriers begin to rise. But now, we name them. We see them for what they are. Not truths about inadequacy, but expressions of ancient wounds seeking healing. We've learned to say, "That's the old story trying to reassert itself. Let's choose a different one." Robert has found his voice in this new family configuration. No longer torn between wife and mother, no longer tasked with constant peacekeeping. He's stepped into a stronger version of himself, one that can hold boundaries with love, that can support Jessica's healing while honoring his connection to me. And Elaine, beautiful, innocent Elaine. She grows surrounded by imperfect people who are trying, who are honest about their struggles, who model the messy reality of family bonds that bend but don't break. She'll grow up knowing not a sanitized fiction of family perfection, but the hard-won truth of family resilience. Last Sunday, as we gathered again around my dining table, the site of that pivotal confrontation, Jessica brought something with her. A photograph, creased and faded, pulled from the back of a drawer where it had been hidden for years. A young woman, painfully thin, with Jessica's eyes and cheekbones, holding a small child with a mixture of awkwardness and fierce protection. Jessica's real mother, in one of the rare good moments. "I want Elaine to know where she comes from," Jessica said quietly. "All of it. The good and the bad. The strength it took for my mother to keep going despite her demons. The strength it took for me to break the cycle." She placed the photograph on the mantel, next to a recent picture of our whole family: Robert, Jessica, Elaine, my husband, and me, past and present, side by side, not in comparison, but in continuity. If you enjoy real stories that defend family and dignity, subscribe. Every week there's one that moves us all. This is the truth I've learned from pushing back my chair instead of walking away. Family isn't built on perfection or performance. It's built on persistence, on the courage to remain present even when it would be easier to retreat, on the willingness to see beyond behavior to the wounds beneath, without using those wounds as an excuse for cruelty or control. Jessica and I will never have the easy, natural mother-daughter bond that some are blessed with. We'll always be working at it, always navigating the complicated terrain of chosen family. But there's beauty in that effort, dignity in that choice, that exceeds what might have been possible with simpler beginnings. The greatest gift we can give Elaine isn't protection from family conflict, but demonstration of family repair. Not the absence of hard feelings, but the brave facing of them. Not perfect harmony, but the complex, challenging music of genuine relationship. Want to know what happened next? How we handled the first holiday season after the confrontation? How Jessica's father reacted when she finally contacted him after 15 years of silence? Write "Want Part 2" in the comments. It wasn't about the chair I pushed back. It wasn't about the dinner ruined or the words exchanged. It was about refusing to be erased, about claiming the space, physical, emotional, relational, that was rightfully mine. Not as competition, not as replacement, but as myself. Unique, valuable, irreplaceable. This is what I want you to remember, if nothing else. Your dignity is non-negotiable. Your place in your family cannot be erased by someone else's narrative. Your worth doesn't depend on matching someone else's standard. Sometimes love means accommodation, patience, understanding. And sometimes love means pushing back your chair, standing up, speaking truth, setting boundaries that protect not just yourself, but the authentic relationships that can only flourish in honesty. Thank you for staying until the end of this journey with me. Leave a heart and tag someone who needs to hear this message today. Someone who might be sitting at their own difficult family table, wondering whether to keep accommodating or finally push back their chair. Remember, the most courageous act of love is sometimes simply refusing to participate in your own erasure.